Good Wednesday, everybody. Rob O'Connor here for RobDinoSports.com, and it is time for our weekly early look at the Week 4 college football schedule. Before we can do that, we need to go back and take a look and talk about what we saw in Week 3, and to do all of that, we need Rob Dino to join us, founder of RobDinoSports.com. Rob, how are you this afternoon?
I'm doing good, Rob. Hump Day here on Wednesday. Obviously, another big schedule in front of us, and NFL Sunday. So, yeah, it's that busy time of week where we get to see some of the late week line moves. They're coming. Haven't seen much of that variety here today, but as always, at this time of the week, Wednesday, on the East Coast here, Wednesday evening, it certainly starts to get towards game time. And, the work intensifies and the excitement obviously builds.
Well, let's, before we take a look at the week ahead, let's start with our look back at Week 3. And, I think we can start right off the bat with Ohio State. They are for real, and they are going to be tough to beat. They handled Oklahoma rather easily on Saturday night in a game that was delayed by weather. I'll get your opinion if you think that had any impact on it. We also need to talk about what this really does for the Big 12 in terms of them having a chance to have a team make the playoff with most of their top-tier teams already having one loss before we even get into conference play, where they're likely to beat up on each other a little bit. So, Rob, let's start with Ohio State and their beatdown of Oklahoma.
Yeah, it certainly was. And Urban Meyer warned us that this was, in his mind, the most talented team he's had. Young, inexperienced, yes. They lost a ton to the NFL. We all know that. But he thought that this group coming in was maybe an even more special group, and certainly through 3 weeks of the season they've shown it. Against Bowling Green and Tulsa, Rob, it was hard for us to get the ultimate gauge on how good they are. But to see them go on the road to Oklahoma with the host team, Oklahoma, in a desperate situation, already having a loss on the season, and then seeing Ohio State dismantle them by 3 touchdowns. It doesn't show up really in the total yardage from last week. Statistically, the numbers are close. Ohio State ran 68 plays. Oklahoma ran 67, 443 yards to 404, 6.5 per play to 6 per play. Those numbers don't necessarily show it, but you see that Ohio State goes on the road and plays clean football, no turnovers. You see Oklahoma making more of the mistake-type plays. Offensive line gives up a few extra sacks that Ohio State didn't. And they just looked really disciplined and focused for such a young football team. I don't think that it's exactly what, the Big Ten East wanted to see. I think they wanted to see if they could find a flaw in Ohio State. But so far, the Michigans and Michigan States of the world aren't seeing that flaw in Ohio State. Oklahoma, Bob Stoops' team, it's hard to get up off the mat now, knowing that, you come into the season off of a year where you were in the Final Four, college football playoff Final Four, and the expectations are that you're going to get back there again with everything that you returned, and already after 3 games, that scenario is not very likely whatsoever. Unless some really drastic things happen, that scenario is not likely. And to the point that you made, now when Big 12 conference season starts, and because the Big 12 is one of those conferences where they play 9 conference games, the beating up begins. The gauntlet begins between Baylor and TCU and Texas and Oklahoma State and West Virginia, where you probably add a loss or 2. We'll see what kind of a coach Bob Stoops is. Can they get up and run the table from here on out? Or since the dream is shattered, do they become a team that we fade throughout the remainder of the season? I think so far, 2 home losses to Houston and Ohio State. They haven't really shown us much, and they haven't shown us that they're the type of team that can run through the Big 12 schedule.
moving right along, and I would agree with you on that point. I think that Oklahoma will definitely trip up again somewhere. There's a lot of talented teams in the Big 12, and I think that might almost be to their detriment where one isn't clear-cut above the rest, and these teams have lost some tough non-conference games that are really going to make it tough for that conference now to get into the playoff. With 2 losses is almost an impossibility, but a team with 1 loss probably would be on the outside looking in on unless there's some pretty big upsets along the way in terms of some other teams falling down into the 2-loss area as well. Another big upset from the weekend, another FCS school goes down to an FBS school. North Dakota State falls. North Dakota State beats Iowa 23-21 on a last-second field goal. And this North Dakota State team has really proven that they're for real and probably could easily beat quite a few of the bigger powerhouse college programs. They just look really good. What are your thoughts on the Iowa loss, and can they recover and go through their Big Ten schedule and have a chance to play in the Big Ten championship game?
Yeah, boy, that one it's really tough to call, but I would say this. Knowing what we know about Kirk Ferentz' team since he's been in Iowa City, you don't really believe that they didn't see North Dakota State coming. It's real easy to say that, well, it was only FCS and perhaps the team didn't take them seriously. We do see that across the country at certain times, but I just don't know if I could buy it with the way Kirk Ferentz focuses his team, and usually with the style of play that they have, they usually do come prepared each and every week. If they lose, it's usually because they're the lesser of the 2 teams, and they just get they get outplayed because they're not as athletic. But for North Dakota State to come in and basically play Iowa football, right? North Dakota State came in there, Rob, and they ran the football and they played the run. All you have to do is look at the rushing numbers in that game and see North Dakota State ran the ball 49 times, gained 234 yards. The other side, 239 yards. The other side, Iowa, gained 34 yards. On their home field, they were outrushed by North Dakota State by 205 yards. They lost the line of scrimmage so badly in that game. It's really crazy. So I think to North Dakota State's credit, they're an FCS team that when they get this type of opportunity to come in and play a Big Ten school or any Power 5 school, this one just happens to be close geographically, they come fully focused. And I think Iowa State was too, and they just got beat. North Dakota State the week before did not play very well against Eastern Washington, a different style from Iowa. But, you had 2 teams just line up that want to play traditional pro-style football, and North Dakota State was the winner. Can Iowa bounce back? I think certainly so. Here's the difference between an Iowa loss, and even if Iowa had 2 losses at this point in time, and Oklahoma's 2 losses, the difference being that it's just for this reason right here, 3rd week of September, that the Big 12 wishes they had a championship game. Iowa can still win the West, still go to the Big Ten championship. They'd be an underdog to any of the top 3 teams that are over there, Ohio State, Michigan, or Michigan State, but still they can find their way there if they win the West, and they'd have an opportunity to win that game and maybe get considered for the Final Four. Oklahoma can't do that because the Big 12 still doesn't have a championship game. So for this exact reason, the Big 12 needs to have one of those games. I know they're working on it, but they're taking their sweet time. And in the meantime, 3 years go by where they don't get any entrant into the big dance, so to speak, for college football. So I think that is certainly a difference between the Big 12 and the Big 10. I think Iowa can bounce back, though. They go on the road this week. They get Rutgers, certainly a team that they should be able to handle, and we'll see. but I fully believe in the ability of Kirk Ferentz to get his team, to get their mindset off of last Saturday and focused on this Saturday, and I think they'll be just fine. Like I say, conference season is ahead of them. Divisional games are ahead of them. They can let that one go. But big win for North Dakota State, obviously a team that, with 5 straight FCS national championships, looks as if they're good enough to win a 6th.
And you look at the Iowa schedule, like you said, on the road against Rutgers. The road schedule is very, very manageable. They play Rutgers, Minnesota, Purdue, Penn State, and Illinois on the road. Their toughest games are all at home. Northwestern shouldn't have any trouble there. Then they get Wisconsin at home, they get Michigan at home, and they get Nebraska at home. Even if they were to drop one of those 3 games, they're likely looking at 2 losses on the season and still playing for the Big Ten championship. The schedule does set up well for them this season in terms of who they play and where they play them.
Yeah, and that's, in the Big Ten, you always worry about your crossover games. The division teams, just like the ACC, just like the SEC, you're going to play your division each and every season, but it's those crossover games. If you can avoid the top teams in the other division, then your schedule becomes a little bit easier. And for Iowa, their schedule has become a little bit easier. I forget which team it is that has to play both of those. It could be Wisconsin maybe has to play Michigan and Ohio State, or Michigan and Michigan State. But there's a team in the West that has it a lot tougher than Iowa does, certainly in those crossover games.
It's Wisconsin. On back-to-back weeks, they play Michigan State and Michigan.
Right, and there you go. That's the difference. Every year those games are going to rotate, so every year, just assuming that Michigan...
And they play Ohio State.
Yeah,
they
catching
play
all 3, right?
3 straight weeks, and then they get to go on the road to Iowa. That's going to be a really tough stretch of games there for Wisconsin, that's for sure.
Yeah, and that's the difference, right? I mean, those games are going to rotate, and every year somebody's going to benefit from it, but this year it's the Iowa side that benefits from it. Certainly Wisconsin does not, and that just makes their road that much tougher.
Let's switch gears a little bit. We'll jump over to the SEC. We saw Alabama win 48-43 over Ole Miss. On the road, a very solid road victory for them. Any concern with them, though, for the second game in a row against a higher caliber opponent? You go back to USC in the opener, they struggled for a quarter and a half. You go to this game, they really struggled until later in the second quarter when the momentum finally started to turn back in favor of the Tide. So they get the win. They're looking good. They're 3-0. They've proven they're going to be very tough to beat now that they found a good solution at quarterback. The question is, any concern with these slow starts, and is there anything that can trip Alabama up?
Well, I think we see it again, and Nick Saban doesn't like to be questioned about it. But certainly the team doesn't do anything to make us believe that anything different is going to occur, and it's these spread offenses, especially when you have a mobile quarterback. In the national championship game last year, they couldn't answer the questions. The questions that already existed about can Alabama play these types of teams. Nick Saban has a tough time defending these types of teams, and Deshaun Watson and company went up and down the field, got a game up in the 40s. They don't win, but certainly they gave Alabama all they could handle. Mississippi, under Hugh Freeze, same style. Again, they throw for over 400 yards in this game, 421 yards passing. Chad Kelly and his receivers did a nice job. They just couldn't seal the deal. That's twice in 3 weeks for them with a 3-touchdown first-half lead where they can't close the door on the opponent. So they're probably kicking themselves. But as for how to beat Alabama, I think that's certainly the way. You want to have one of these spread offenses that spreads Alabama out and takes them from sideline to sideline, and you try to attack in gaps against them. We'll see throughout the remainder of the season how Alabama does. You know what? They're good enough offensively now, though, Rob, and it totally helps that they found a quarterback real early in the season, because maybe if Jalen Hurts didn't become the guy and the capable guy that he is at quarterback in Game 3 of the season, maybe Mississippi's effort would have been good enough if Alabama was still looking for a starting quarterback. But they're able, because they have so much talent, especially on the perimeter at wide receiver, to attack with. And Mississippi, their weakness happens to be in the secondary, but it causes you to have to game plan for a running quarterback, a throwing quarterback, all the Alabama receivers, and Alabama runs for 334 yards in that game against Ole Miss. So I think the fact that they found their quarterback early probably got them this win, because if they were still going back and forth and maybe even playing two quarterbacks in that game, I'm not so sure that they would have been able to score enough to win. Defense came through with a big play when it had to, right? They picked Chad Kelly, hit him, picked the ball off, and ran it back. So the defense came through and got them a big score, and their come-from-behind ability obviously was on display last Saturday. Tough 3 games for Ole Miss and Hugh Freeze. We talked about whether or not Oklahoma can pick themselves up off the mat after 2 losses. Mississippi, same type of deal. In most people's top 10 entering the year, if not inside the top 10, just outside, maybe 11 or 12, where most college football experts were ranking them. So they had their vision set on a Final Four appearance. With 2 losses, the only thing that they can hope for is, the West is tough. Maybe Alabama slips up and Ole Miss can find their way to the top and maybe to a championship game. But I think it's very difficult. I mean, my opinion is it's very difficult for Hugh Freeze and company right now to, bounce back quickly. I think you have to get a win under your belt, and then maybe the confidence grows a little bit. But I wouldn't think that teams like Oklahoma and Ole Miss can come back following week and, lock up a 3-4 touchdown win. It seems like it's a tough beat for their psyche, if nothing else.
Very good point there in terms of just knowing that now they're going to need Alabama to lose twice, and they're going to need to win out. I mean, those 2 things happening seem very unlikely at this point in time, so I would say things are not looking good for Ole Miss. Let's transition over to the ACC, and we're a couple weeks away from what's going to be a monster showdown between Louisville and Clemson. But let's talk about what Louisville did to Florida State. I mean, I had put Florida State on upset alert, thought that they might fall to Louisville just based on what I had seen from Louisville. I was really impressed by their play. I thought that it was just a good situation for them to be in, getting Florida State at home and first true road start for their quarterback. Thought it was a good situation. Thought they might win. Didn't think they would win in such a convincing fashion. What did you see from Louisville, and is Florida State really that bad, or was that just a bad spot for them to be in?
First off, they're not that bad, and because we're 2 weeks removed from watching them be down 3 touchdowns in the first half and come back and beat Ole Miss, so they're not as bad as they looked. However, Louisville is far outperformed expectations. I know entering the season, they were kind of that dark horse pick in the ACC Atlantic Division, but because you had a proven Clemson team and because you had a Florida State team that prognosticators absolutely fell in love with over the spring and summer because they had so many returning starters to this team, most people were hopping over Clemson with Florida State to make the ACC championship game. So from that viewpoint, they were considered a dark horse. Can they really beat these 2 teams? I don't think anybody thought so, Rob. And not only did they beat them, some of the numbers in that game are ridiculous. Florida State, 2 of 13 on third down conversions, 15.4%, horrible, while the other team's converting 50%. That's Louisville, Florida State gets sacked 5 times, lose 47 yards on those sacks. Florida State averages only 4.2 yards per play with 11 returning starters on offense. Get outgained 530 to 284. I mean, there's not a single aspect of that game, including special teams, where Florida State was not grossly outplayed. And to Louisville's credit, they were ready for the game. And perhaps Florida State came in, Robin, this could happen. Perhaps they came in thinking, hey, ACC goes through us. We're the big deal. We might be on your field, but we're the big deal. And, I mean, Louisville hit them right off the bat. The game wasn't close. From opening kick to final gun, the game wasn't close. They had 7 points before you could blink. Then they had 14 before you could blink again. And all of a sudden, by the time Florida State knew they were in a ball game, they were done. So I think Lamar Jackson, certainly you see it. It's unanimous now, universally considered the Heisman Trophy favorite, his to lose. Louisville's come a long way in 3 weeks. Bobby Petrino has some parts there. He's got a defense there. And when they go to play Clemson, I was asked this question in the sports memo forum yesterday. What would the point spread be on the game at Clemson if it were played this Saturday? And my power ratings suggest that Clemson would be a 4-point home favorite. Clemson's got some work to do to be ready for Louisville. They're certainly as talented. We know that. Clemson's was considered to be a national title contender heading into this season. Slow start. Big win last week against South Carolina State, and we'll see a little more of them tomorrow night against Georgia Tech. But what a showdown, and how to think that Louisville, in theory, could have the Atlantic Division of the ACC and a berth in the ACC championship game, theoretically now, wrapped up after 5 weeks of the season. Boy, I don't think anybody would have thought that to start the year, but it's the position they can put themselves in. They'd obviously have to run the rest of the table ACC-wise. But, boy, they can put themselves in some driver's seat should they go out and beat Clemson 2 weeks from now. Are they looking ahead this week? Who knows? But they're a monster favorite. I don't know that they have to worry about it too much.
Well, I think this is a fantastic transition into the first game we're going to talk about this week is Clemson, Georgia Tech, Thursday night game. So if you're listening after Thursday night, you might want to skip ahead about 5 minutes. But we've got Clemson coming in off of a 59-0 win over South Carolina State. The teams agreed to shorten the second half by 3 minutes per quarter as a result of the score. Georgia Tech coming in off of a 38-7 win over Vandy. And I think there's a couple things we need to talk about with this game. First of all, Georgia Tech does that triple option offense, and it's tough to prepare for. The good news for Clemson is, not truthfully, but they had a bye last week. They played South Carolina State. I'm not sure how much time they really spent preparing for South Carolina State versus moving ahead and starting to prepare for Georgia Tech. So getting ready for the triple option, they had some time. But then you just brought up the point. It's a big look-ahead spot for them. And if they don't take Georgia Tech seriously, they could be in a little bit of trouble. Georgia Tech had a rough year last year. They lost a lot of games close. They lost a lot of games late. It seems that they've kind of righted the ship. They're off to a pretty good start this season. What do you see happening on Thursday night, Rob?
Well, the first thing, in my opinion, that I would erase from my handicap at least any thought of Clemson looking ahead to Louisville next week. I think that the whole Deshaun Watson a confession kind of last week during game week where he, shouldered the brunt of Clemson's offensive sputtering and then put it all on himself, said he wasn't playing well enough and that would have to get better, and then they go out and they do score 59 against South Carolina State. So I think after those first 2 games of the season, I don't know that Clemson is looking ahead of anybody right now. I think they're looking to restore their reputation across the country, and there's no better way to do it than on a singled-out Thursday night game where the nation has nothing else to watch, nothing else to bet except the Clemson-Georgia Tech game, aside from the NFL game. But I'm speaking college football here. They're the show on Thursday night. So they'll have the audience, and they'll get the, show to the college football world that they still are one of the teams that can possibly play for the college football playoffs. So I'd expect them to come fully focused in this one. The problem for them is Georgia Tech, over the course of the last decade plus, has given them fits more often than not. It's been a team, if you go back to the Calvin Johnson years, that has really wrecked seasons for Clemson. So this is an opponent where they have to come to play. Like you said, Paul Johnson's triple option, tough to prepare for. I think Clemson's got enough film because they played him enough to know how to defend it, whether or not, every year. And in Clemson's case, this is true this year. Although the defense is playing well, the defense has actually been the anchor for this team. Still, you've got a lot of new bodies, a lot of new faces, probably on the field as starters for the first time against a triple option. That triple option seems to be in full gear right now. They run for 289 yards last week against Vandy, which is a tough defense, not top 5 or top 10 in the nation, but Vandy's reputation is as a tough defensive team. They got run over by Georgia Tech. And what's even more worth considering here, Rob, is the fact that last week Georgia Tech threw for 202 yards in that game on only 8 completions. We know what this triple option is about. You see it with Navy, especially the 4 years Keenan Reynolds played there. You see it with Army. You see it with Air Force when they have solid quarterbacks. You suck so many guys up to the line of scrimmage, and Georgia Tech always has, a 6'4", 6'5" wide receiver. You get single coverage downfield. You fake that option. You throw over the top, and usually guys are running free. It happened last week against Vandy. Clemson's got to keep an eye on that. There's a lot of things to consider when you're playing Georgia Tech, but the point being that Georgia Tech is capable this year with Justin Thomas at quarterback. They're capable of connecting on that deep ball. There's years where the quarterback's not good enough to complete that pass, and wide open guys get overthrown, underthrown, and you don't capitalize on chances when you can get 7. So this is a good Georgia Tech team. Remember, last year they went 3-9, as you pointed out, but there was such a slew of injuries to Georgia Tech last year. You almost can't count the 3-9. A bunch of those guys are back this year, off to a pretty good start. I think it'll be a good game. I think both offenses could probably perform well here, but I wouldn't put Clemson in the category of teams that are looking ahead here, because I don't think there'll be any look ahead. I think that, like I said earlier, they're looking to restore a reputation and make sure Louisville knows that next week in Death Valley that they've got a fight on their hands, that Clemson hasn't disappeared from the national scene.
Well, Rob, great analysis there, and it will be fun to watch. I can tell you I'm looking much more forward to Clemson, Georgia Tech than I am looking forward to Houston and a Tom Brady-less New England game on Thursday night. So should be a lot of eyeballs on that game, as you mentioned. Move ahead to a very early kickoff for such a premier game, 12 noon, Saturday afternoon, Wisconsin at Michigan State. Wisconsin entering in off of a 23-17 win over Georgia State. That you could probably put that final score into the category of looking ahead to Michigan State a little bit. Michigan State coming off of a very impressive 36-28 win over Notre Dame, where the final score is not quite reflective of how the game was played. It was a lot closer at the end than it actually was throughout, as Michigan State looked really good against the Notre Dame team, and as a relatively decent underdog of a touchdown or more, Rob, you had them as your upset alert of the week to beat Notre Dame, and they come through. What do you see happening on Saturday afternoon?
Yeah, well, I think that we got to see last week, Rob, what Michigan State is, or how good they're going to be this year. I think they're always the forgotten team in the Big Ten, right? They're Michigan State, yeah, they're really good, but They're not Ohio State. They're not Michigan. I thought, number one, the situation just set up so nicely for them last week. The fact that they were off a bye week, had the extra week to prepare for Notre Dame. The fact that they got Ed Davis, one of their top linebackers, a 6th year of eligibility granted by the NCAA, and he was going to play immediately. It helps their defense. So he gets a game under his belt. You can expect the defense to only get better. And the fact that Notre Dame had so many issues in that secondary. And I think that, just generally speaking, Rob, if you mention Michigan State to 100 college football fans, they never really, or if you wanted to find out Michigan State's assets, let's put it that way. If you ask 100 college football fans, what are Michigan State's assets? You're not really going to get anybody to say the passing game. The passing game for this team is a little bit underrated. We got to see the baton obviously has been passed from quarterback to quarterback here. Connor Cook gone. And so when they're breaking in a new quarterback, I think most people thought that the passing game wouldn't be very effective. But I don't know. We saw in week 1 that the passing game was going to be pretty effective, that they have, and O'Connor had got a quarterback here that no relation there, right, Rob, with the O'Connor stuff?
Not that I know of.
You can claim him if you want, but we saw that he's going to be able to throw the football, and they did against Notre Dame. When they can balance their offense, they're a tough team. Last week, 260 yards rushing, 241 yards passing, 501 total. And when you can go for 240-plus rushing and passing, and you have Michigan State's defense, you're going to be a handful for anybody. Add in the fact they were getting 8 points, made it pretty easy for us to go that direction. This week against Wisconsin, they kind of bounced into a good situation again, right? Wisconsin, I think that this is the week that maybe we'll see the offensive line injuries. Dan Volt's gone for the season, of course, a couple of weeks ago, and some other nagging injuries across that offensive line, and the quarterback situation back and forth. Now here, interesting side note for myself, Alex Hornibrook, the starting quarterback for Wisconsin this week, actually was the quarterback of my son's middle school team. He's a Westchester, Pennsylvania kid. So I knew him as a little kid. Good for him to be in the position he's in right now as starting quarterback for Wisconsin. But you're talking about a kid, a sophomore, in his first start ever against the Michigan State defense with an offensive line Wisconsin's offensive line is never even average. It's either elite or above average. But I think the injuries probably make them a little weaker this year. So Hornibrook, you add in the fact that Corey Clement might not play here at running back. Keep an eye on his status throughout the week. He's a workhorse back, a typical Wisconsin back. Got an NFL future if he can stay healthy. And he would take a huge load off of a young quarterback in this contest. But I just think situationally this sets up real good once again for Michigan State, like last week did. This week seems to be a good matchup for them. I like everything about the Michigan State team right now, I'll tell you the truth. And I don't know that Wisconsin is going to have the offensive diversity to be able to handle that Michigan State defense. On the opposite side, Wisconsin's a great defense. But thus far, they played LSU week 1, right? But we see LSU still has the prehistoric offense. When you can come in as a pretty good defense and face something like that, if your game plan is good, it's not that tough to stop. Wisconsin shut them down. They haven't really faced anybody as of right now that's as diverse, rushing and passing-wise, or as balanced as Michigan State is. So I think a lot of arrows point towards MSU in this game, while the Big Ten world is talking about Ohio State and Michigan, rightfully so. Here they come once again, Michigan State. I think this should be a victory for them. I think they'll probably get the point spread cover in that game. Hornibrook's not a kid that'll get rattled, but I just don't think it's an ideal setting for him to make his first start. And do you look over your shoulder in this case, Rob? I wonder how this Bart Houston, Alex Hornibrook quarterback battle is going to go. Is it going to be one of those situations where if you're not playing well in the second quarter, late second quarter, you get pulled for the rest of the games. You have to constantly look over your shoulder. We'll see, but I just don't think it sets up well for Wisconsin here.
Moving right along, we've got a big battle in the SEC East between Tennessee and Florida. Not sure what Tennessee's issue is, if it's they play down to their competition or what, but they looked really good against Virginia Tech, and they looked really average against Appalachian State and against Ohio. They're coming in off a 28-19 win over Ohio. Florida, 32-0, just an average victory against North Texas, took care of business rather easily. This Florida defense is something else, though. Granted, they haven't played the toughest of competition this year, but they've allowed 14 points, 2 touchdowns all year. That's it. How do you think Tennessee's going to be able to handle the Florida defense? Do you think they're going to play up and play like they did against Virginia Tech, or is there going to be more struggles ahead for them?
Well, I think if we look back to the Virginia Tech game, first of all, Rob, I think it's a slew of Virginia Tech mistakes that broke that game open. That game, I think the 45-24 final is a little bit deceptive. Virginia Tech was in that game for quite a while. And, in fact, they led that game for quite a while until the mistakes.
Yeah, I think they opened up 14-0. They were first on the board and held the lead till I think midway through the second quarter in that game.
And then, the mistakes got to them, and Tennessee capitalized to their credit and got themselves a 21-point victory. The other two games are not that impressive. Appalachian State, we talked about it a lot. The whole world talked about it a lot in their opener. They're a very good Sun Belt team. They're a very veteran team. They've got a lot of experience there. But to have to be forced to overtime on your home field by Appalachian State wasn't very impressive. The Ohio U game last week wasn't very impressive. And you're right, the offense has sputtered. When you have Josh Dobbs, when you have Jalen Hurd, when you have Alvin Kamara, and the weapons that they have at skilled positions, you should be scoring points. But the offensive line has been a nightmare. They are now injury-riddled, Tennessee is. So Butch Jones has a lot to deal with here at this point in time. And a lot of stuff that, I tell you the truth, Rob, and we feel like the college football season is in full gear now, but when you think back, we're talking to each other here on September 21st. This season just started 3 weeks ago. Heading as little as 3 weeks ago, the Tennessee bandwagon was rolling downhill so fast, and you couldn't jump on it quick enough. Most people thought this is your SEC champion. Off of, last year that bandwagon got going. This year it really got going. And then to come out the way they did with all those expectations after 3 games, they really haven't had 4 full quarters of good football. And I don't know if offensively they can get it here. You add into the mix that Florida's a little bit in their head, 11 straight victories over this team, right? Even when Tennessee was, the better team last year, they still couldn't win the game. They've put an awful lot of emphasis on this one. We've all heard about how Tennessee circled this game on their schedule. This is the game they've been pointing towards. All that other talk that goes with a rivalry game like this, and a heated division rivalry game that's like this. But can they get on the field and can they execute and win the game? I don't know. I'm really a little bit befuddled by the fact that they can't move the football. Their defense has really been the best part of their team, much like Florida's. Their defense isn't in the same elite class as Florida's. Florida's defense, you could legitimately argue is on par with Alabama's. Alabama's probably a little bit better, but Florida is right there. They're going to unload a bunch of guys to the NFL off of this defense. It's a savage defense. So it's going to be difficult for Tennessee, especially with the offensive line injuries. The problem that you have with the Florida side, of course, Luke Del Rio goes down last week, right? So it's crazy how 2 Purdue quarterbacks who couldn't hold on to starting jobs at Purdue are now running SEC teams. Danny Etling at LSU and now Austin Appleby, graduate student transferred over to Florida here. I watched a lot of Austin Appleby at Purdue. He's not bad. He was on a bad team, but I think if you put good parts around him, he can certainly be more than serviceable. The problem for him this week, hey, their biggest threat, explosiveness-wise, is Antonio Callaway, the wide receiver, and Callaway probably doesn't play here. So that takes a huge piece away from a huge home run threat away from Florida. We saw him actually return a punt for touchdown in the SEC Championship last year against Alabama, so he can be a dual threat as far as wide receiver and special teams are concerned. You have to, if you're going to bet this game, you have to be convinced of which team won't make the bigger mistake. And I think that for Florida, what will happen here is they're going to put in a safe game plan for Appleby, try and make sure that they don't turn the ball over, because Florida's a team, and rightfully so, that believes that they can win any game with their defense right now. They can force mistakes, and they can get short fields and help Appleby out. So Dobbs and company on Tennessee side, we've seen them make mistakes the last year plus, right? They can make some silly mistakes, whether it be fumble on pitches, whether it be Dobbs throwing an ill-advised pass. I think that's the reason why we've seen this number. It opened at 8. My power ratings thought it should have opened 6.5. The game did open at 8. It's been bet down to 6.5. So I thought that the money right now is just flocking to the defensive unit of the Florida Gators, and the fact that Florida's won 11 in a row. Totals come down, Rob, obviously. Open 45, down now to 43. I think that makes a lot of sense. But if you had to ask me right now, I don't think I would hesitate making a play on Florida plus the 6.5. You just cross your fingers and hope that that offense doesn't make any serious mistakes that leads to easy Tennessee points.
I mean, I'm kind of with you. I think getting 7 is a bit much in a rivalry, especially in a rivalry where one team has had so much success against the other. It's going to be tight. It's going to get late. Something's going to happen. And I think getting the 7 is probably a smarter play than laying the 7 for sure.
Yeah, I'd have to agree. I think that certainly Coach McElwain will have the right game plan, and all he has to do is let his defense loose, right? It's as easy for Florida, maybe easier for Florida's defense to force the mistake as it is for Tennessee's defense to force the mistake against Florida's offense, even though Tennessee's got the better offensive players. I think, enough isn't made of offensive lines when you're handicapping games and whatnot, but the way Tennessee's offensive line has played so far, Rob, against a defense like this and a front 7 like this, I just wonder, Josh Dobbs is going to have an incredible game. I don't know if there's going to be any holes for Jalen Hurd. I don't know if there's going to be any holes for Kamara. So it probably comes down to whichever team can get the most short fields, can make the big special teams play. And in that instance, when you're looking at a game like that, you're absolutely right. Plus 6.5, plus 7 usually is a no-brainer, a mechanical-type play. Go ahead and take the underdog in the points.
Moving out west to a cross-division Pac-12 showdown between UCLA and Stanford. Stanford in off of a 27-10 win against USC. UCLA coming in off of a 17-14 victory over BYU. Stanford, of course, undefeated on the season. UCLA with the opening week loss at Texas A&M, but other than that, they've taken care of business. Now they'll enter conference play. How do you see this early season matchup playing out?
I think if you're UCLA, you really would have rather played this game 5 weeks from now rather than fourth week of the season here towards the end of September. Mainly because the timing and the cohesiveness between Josh Rosen and his receivers still isn't what it will be. 4 guys, all brand new as far as wide receiver position goes for Josh Rosen. Lost so much talent to the NFL at that position. And we saw it in the A&M game. They only had 9 points until there were 4.5 minutes left in that contest. Rosen was under constant pressure from the bookend defensive ends. Myles Garrett and that defense for Texas A&M gave him a hard time all day. They finally scored a touchdown, and then they got a fluke touchdown to tie that thing up and send it to overtime. Since then, they played UNLV, a defense that they could score against, even with Rosen and his receivers still learning each other. They could sit on the running game a little bit. And then last week against BYU, they get off to a 17-0 start and have to hang on, really. BYU comes back with 14 points. But again, you're talking about a Brigham Young team that has made a radical change in offense. They're still, when you watch BYU play, you can see it, that they still haven't quite learned Ty Detmer's West Coast playbook. It's way different than Robert Anai's playbook that they've had the last few years. 85, 90 plays a game, up-tempo, let's go, go, go. Right now, Taysom Hill doesn't look like the type of quarterback that really wants to be running a West Coast offense. Taysom Hill would rather be running a quicker pace offense. So BYU's got their issues offensively. UCLA capitalizes and wins 17-14. I think the difference between Stanford USC last week, 27-10 victory, and Stanford UCLA heading into this week is UCLA is a far more physical team, Rob. We talked last week when we were on the Stanford USC analysis that USC in week 1 had played Alabama and just physically got whipped, right? They gave up 52 points in 2.5 quarters, lose the game 52-3 after holding a 3-0 lead. And physically, they just weren't a match for Alabama. And if you could find a comparison to Alabama's physical style, anywhere across the country, you would probably make Stanford that direct comparison. They don't have the athleticism that Alabama does, but they're a physical football team. When you play them, you're going to know it when the game is done. And USC, once again, didn't match up physically. I mean, Stanford ran for 295 yards in that game. You know it's coming. You know Christian McCaffrey's coming, but defensively they couldn't stop it. And they really didn't get much going in their passing game. USC didn't. Their offense is their bread and butter right now. But like I say, they're more finesse than physical. UCLA on the defensive side is very physical. Jim Mora Jr. has gotten a good batch of recruits in, and he's gotten his defensive philosophy through to his players. Remember, he was an NFL defensive coordinator for a lot of years. And he's got them playing his style. So I think the difference between UCLA and USC, Stanford's 2 opponents the last 2 weeks, is Stanford will face a more physical team in this matchup. Still, all that being said, I really like Stanford from the get-go this year. I think they're an underrated team once again. Their quarterback situation was settled in week 1, and I think they're better for it. And when you have McCaffrey, you always have the extra weapon. Don't think that UCLA is going to be able to crack the code on the Stanford defense this week. Like I say, I think if you're UCLA, you really, really would have rather played this game down the road than play it this soon. So even though it's on the road, and even though they'll get a much tougher battle from UCLA than they did USC, I still think Stanford wins this game. At 3 points to me doesn't seem like a heck of a lot. The power ratings made this game Stanford -3, so the number's right in line with what power ratings suggested the price should be. I think Stanford's just a better team at this point in time.
And I think that Christian McCaffrey's kind of an X factor. I think that he'll make a play or two. It's a very good opportunity for him to show what he's made of. Primetime game on ABC. I'll have quite a few eyes on him.
And he's that kind of, he'll make that play, Rob. I was just going to say whether he makes it from the backfield on a handoff or whether he makes it on a swing pass or they'll even line him up in the slot. One way or another, they'll find a matchup that suits them for that 1 or 2 plays, like you were saying, that McCaffrey can become a game breaker and sort of open up a game like this, because I do think UCLA's defense is really worth noting this year. For a lot of years, they've been labeled as soft, and they're not soft anymore, at least not to my eye after 3 weeks. They look pretty stout on the defensive side of the football. Eddie Vanderdoes coming back across that defensive line after being hurt all season last year really makes a difference. But Jim Mora Jr. has got a good defense there.
Moving ahead to a huge early season showdown in the SEC West, Arkansas and Texas A&M. Neutral site game, but obviously a little bit more travel for Arkansas than for Texas A&M. Texas A&M coming in off of a 29-16 true road victory against Auburn. Arkansas showed no signs of letting down 2 weeks ago. They pulled the upset at TCU. Last week they rolled very easily, 42-3 against Texas State to set up really a true test game for these two programs to see which one of them might emerge as a bit of a dark horse that could potentially challenge Alabama, although neither of these two teams have nearly the talent level of Alabama, but one of them is going to be remain undefeated in conference play. Arkansas's first conference game. It is the second for Texas A&M. So Texas A&M could jump out to a nice 2-0, or Arkansas could finally get their footing right and position themselves to be a true contender in the SEC West. Arkansas right now getting about 6 points. What do you see happening late on a Saturday night?
Well, I think first off, you had to like what you saw out of the A&M offense last week. And I think that's the biggest question mark at this point, Rob, is Trevor Knight going to be able to lead an explosive Texas A&M offense, a Kevin Sumlin style offense, Noel Mazzoni style offense? And we hadn't really seen that out of them to start the season. But again, I'll go back to the UCLA game, and knowing now what maybe we weren't so sure of then, UCLA is a very good defense. So for Trevor Knight and that offense in their season opener to come out and do what they did, I guess they deserve a little bit of credit for that, but they weren't as explosive as you would expect a Sumlin offense to be. Last week against Auburn, we all saw Auburn give Clemson's offense fits in week one, and there's some out there that believe, and I can't say that I could argue with them, that the Auburn defensive front is of top 10 caliber throughout the country. So you're going against a pretty good defense. Auburn doesn't have much to hurt you in the way of offense, but certainly to go out there and get 231 yards rushing, 247 through the air, 478 total for the game, it's a pretty good sign for Texas A&M. They've now been through two really good defenses in UCLA and Auburn. They've come out with flying colors, won both games. Auburn had a lot of first downs last week, made some yards against the Texas A&M defense, 399, but just couldn't put points on the scoreboard. Arkansas is, again, I talked earlier about Michigan State and how if you asked 100 people that follow college football what Michigan State's assets are, the pass offense would not be listed. But, I say this almost to nauseam, but I really, dating back to last year, thought that when they hired Dan Enos from Central Michigan to come be their offensive coordinator, it was one of the best hires I've seen in the last 2 years, because Dan Enos brings that Central Michigan balanced style of offense where you obviously we know Arkansas is going to be able to run the football, but Brett Bielema needed some type of passing game to go with it, some type of passing game that could be respected. And Dan Enos has brought that and multiply that by 10, what he's brought there. Arkansas makes you respect the run so much that play action works almost every time. And as long as you have a competent quarterback, and now we've got the second of the Allen brothers, Brandon Allen last year, Austin Allen this year, to go ahead and execute it, and they're doing a good job right now. So Arkansas last week held Texas State to 105 total yards. The fourth quarter was shortened to a 10-minute quarter because of impending weather, so 5 more minutes where maybe they could have piled up a few more defensive statistics. But offensively, they were really good, 467 yards on only 66 plays, averaging about 7 yards per play. and they just do it so methodically. They'll try and do that here against A&M. I think what's undersold here a little bit, aside from the Arkansas pass offense, is the Arkansas defense, and I'm not quite sure yet how good they are. I think that's going to be answered here against A&M, because A&M has speed out on the perimeter with those wide receivers that A&M has that Arkansas just hasn't seen yet. Louisiana Tech in game one with a new quarterback, they caught him at the right time, because Louisiana Tech has good wide receivers, but brand new quarterback. Take them a little while to get going. Now we see them start rolling. Here against A&M, it's the one matchup that if I could convince myself that A&M can exploit that matchup, I'd be on A&M in a second. But I'm not so sure that they can exploit it, because I just don't know how good the Arkansas defense is right now. There's just not enough in their opposition through 3 weeks, Arkansas's opposition through 3 weeks, to have me make a real clear judgment on that. I could see the game going either way. Brett Bielema's got a tough football team. Let's face it, they went into TCU and got that win. But again, TCU is kind of like a Swiss cheese defense opposed to Texas A&M right now. Second year under John Chavis, the improvement is really noticeable at this point in time, which we thought it would be heading into the season. So the point spread's probably in a real good place. I tell you the truth, Rob, I think both of these teams, I think what might be going the wrong way in this contest is the total. I saw the total opened at about 53.5, I believe, and then I saw it take a dive down a couple of points to around 51.5. I'm looking at it right now for us. It opened 51, and it's down to 49. I don't know that that's the correct movement here. I think that these offenses probably can do a pretty good job on the opposing defense. I think A&M is going to have to respect the run too much. Allen can hurt them through the air. And like I said before, I'm not sure that Arkansas is going to be able to handle the A&M speed on the perimeter. So perhaps we'll look that direction, maybe over 49. We'll look at it a little bit more, but right now that's the way I'd lean.
Rob, that wraps up the games that we had discussed that we would talk about, the biggest one of the week. We're going to throw out a new feature this week. We started off the season. We did the upset alert and the under-the-radar game. This week we're going to take a little different angle with it. We're going to talk about a couple of make-or-break games where teams really need to win to kind of set the tone, to have a chance to get their program going in the right direction, whatever the case may be. The one that I'm going to go with is Georgia and Ole Miss. From an Ole Miss perspective, they are all but out of the national championship picture. They still have an outside shot at the SEC West Division, but again, they need to run the table. They absolutely could not afford a loss to Georgia. If they do, even their dream of an SEC championship would officially be over if it's not over already. On the other side, Georgia entering SEC play. This is one of their cross-division games. Either Tennessee or Florida will have a loss after Saturday, and it would be a big advantage to Georgia if they could be 1-0 and still get a chance to play both Florida and Tennessee. If they were to go to 0-1, that kind of opens up the door to a bit more trouble for them if they think they're going to represent the SEC out of the East. What do you see in this one? And Mississippi's about a 7-point favorite, I believe.
Yeah, I think that Kirby Smart, head coach of Georgia, is still kind of feeling his way. They were 4th and 10 pass completion away from losing to Missouri last week in Columbia. Missouri had the right idea. Rob, Missouri had the idea that we're going to take Nick Chubb, Sony Michel out of the game, and we're going to make your freshman quarterback, Jacob Eason, who hasn't proven much yet, we're going to make him beat us. In the end, he did with that 4th and 10 pass for a touchdown, 28-27. But Georgia had the benefit of 5 turnovers in that game, and in watching it, Drew Lock and the Mizzou offense, the new Josh Heupel offense, went up and down the field for a lot of that game on the Georgia defense. And what you're going to have here, I think, in Hugh Freeze's offense with Chad Kelly is the same style, up-tempo, but with better players at the skill position. Chad Kelly against Drew Lock. Drew Lock could be Chad Kelly in 2 years, but right now Chad Kelly's the better quarterback. When you have Stringfellow and Evan Engram at tight end and all the players that they have on the perimeter, Mississippi matches up real well offensively against that Georgia defense. The question is, like what we brought up earlier, Mississippi's motivation. Can Hugh Freeze get this team up off the mat to play this game? Because I guarantee you Kirby Smart's team will come to play. And they're loaded with confidence off that win last week. Isaiah McKenzie, their all-purpose, all-everything, who caught the game-winning touchdown against Mizzou last week. I think they were referring to him as the human joystick. Can make trouble for Mississippi's secondary. So it's a game where, to me, motivation on Mississippi's part will mean everything. If they don't come out flat, if they come to play, I think they're the better team. But certainly Georgia, it's not an East Division game, so it probably doesn't mean as much as an Eastern Division game would, like the Missouri game did last week. But still, it's an SEC contest that Kirby Smart would love to win. Remember, Kirby Smart was part of the Alabama staff that lost the previous 2 years to Ole Miss. And he just saw Nick Saban and Alabama almost lose a third straight year. So there could be some issues here. We'll see what he learned from the 2 losses when he was at Alabama, and maybe he can apply something different with his troops. But like I said, I think the biggest fundamental mismatch on the field could be that Ole Miss offense, if ready to play, against the Georgia defense.
And, Rob, like we said, that's going to be a big make-or-break game for both these teams. Like I said, it's across division for Georgia, but if they could be 2-0 in the conference and already have Florida or Tennessee with their first loss, it would really give them a little bit of a leg up as they go down the stretch and get into more of their in-division conference games. And for Mississippi, no way they're winning the SEC West without a win against Georgia on Saturday afternoon. You had a chance to look through the card. I gave you a little bit of a heads up what we were going to do. What have you come up with? What is your make-or-break game of Week 4?
Well, I think we'll move to the Big 12, right? They seem to be the talk of the college football world right now because for most, the expectation is that the Big 12 is now out of it as far as possible entrant into the college football playoff is concerned. If not out of it, the overwhelming opinion is they're near being out of it, and they only have a couple of hopes left, one of those hopes being Baylor. So it'll be make or break for Baylor. And, what comes into play here, Rob, is that lousy referee call 2 weeks ago in the Oklahoma State Central Michigan game where Oklahoma could be coming in here 3-0, and we could have a legitimate, almost early style, I won't say elimination game because the Big 12 is such a gauntlet, so many teams that are capable of beating one another, and since the Big 12 plays everybody, you'll have Oklahoma State, Oklahoma, West Virginia, Texas. You could even throw Texas Tech in there as a potential spoiler to the whole mix. So at TCU, the season's going to be about beating up on each other, but we could have had 3-0, probably should have had 2 3-0 teams here. Last year, 45-35 Baylor. So far, to me, Baylor hasn't looked like the Baylor under Art Briles. It looks more like a Baylor under Jim Grobe, although when you watched the game last week, they were on, I think they were a Friday night game, if I'm not mistaken, but when you watch on the sidelines, it doesn't look like Jim Grobe has a heck of a lot to do with what's going on the field. When they're on offense, the camera was constantly on Kendall Briles, the offensive coordinator, and it looks like he, without question, is running everything, not looking for any type of, permission to do anything. It's his offense, and defensively it's Phil Bennett's defense. So, well, they're not different in that regard, but I think weaponry-wise, they look a little different. Now, they were shorthanded last week. Shock Linwood was hurt a little bit. He did wind up setting a Baylor record for rushing last week, but he didn't play an awful lot because he was hurt. They played an overmatched opponent. Kind of tough to judge there. But Seth Russell and company will have to come out here and score what we expect out of Baylor, 49-52, something like that. Like I said last year, the final score was 45-35. They have to score to beat Oklahoma State because they can score and score and score again. Mason Rudolph, 540 passing yards last week. That was an Oklahoma State record. James Washington set a record. I think in all, Oklahoma State set like 5 offensive records last week against Pittsburgh. Baylor's defense, while it's looked good, this is typical Baylor, right? Start your season with a bunch of pushovers and then get into conference season. So I don't know that we can identify how good Baylor is at this point, especially on defense. I think Oklahoma State is a very tough test for this team. Rob, money agreed. Baylor opened up 10.5 in this game, which to me seemed a little heavy to lay 10.5 with Baylor, a team that's been unproven up until this point in time. But the money has chased it all the way down to 7.5, which is real close to where the power ratings opened up this game at Baylor -7. Maybe guys have numbers similar to the ones that I use, and they saw a lot of value in that 10.5. But at any rate, the money's all come Oklahoma State's way, and the money has all gone the way of the over from 71.5 now up as high as 76 in some locales. And I think you could understand it. Oklahoma State's defense last week got run over by Pittsburgh. Pittsburgh doesn't have nearly the passing game with Nathan Peterman and the receivers that they have. They're not nearly as explosive as Baylor. So maybe in for our very first typical Big 12 shootout, but it is make or break for Baylor. If Oklahoma State comes in and wins this game, there's, I think, a complete trouble for the Big 12, right? I mean, some things would have to go wrong across the country for them to find an entrant into the college football playoff. Baylor seems to be their legitimate hope at this point in time, and we'll see how they handle this game. But right now, money thinks Oklahoma State's the better play at +7.5.
Rob, I think you're absolutely right about that make or break. If Baylor loses and even if Oklahoma State were to run the table in the Big 12, I'm not sure the selection committee could overlook the unjust loss that they had, because it was a loss nonetheless. And the question will be, well, why was it so close at the end? Why did you even let that happen? And it's going to be a big hurdle for them to climb. So if Oklahoma State plays spoiler, upsets Baylor, that could really put a bigger dent in the Big 12's chances at a playoff. Any other games or any other things you want to plug, promote before we get out of here for this week, Rob?
Yeah, I think as far as the show is concerned, we've covered just about everything that we set out to cover here. Obviously, we can't get to every game for the folks. We would suggest that if there's a game that you have of interest, certainly send an email to robvinosports@gmail.com, and we can get back to you with something maybe that we know on the contest or a feeling that we have one way or another. As far as the weekend goes, certainly for myself, I'm in play tomorrow night with the college football game between Clemson and Georgia Tech. If you want to get the selection on that game, once again, go to robvinosports.com. Information there as to how you would go about becoming a member and receiving selections from either myself, Rob O'Connor, or Derek Davis. I'm in play again on Friday with a contest in the 3-card Friday night TV card that we have. And then Saturday will come with the big Saturday card. It'll be up and available tomorrow. So once again, if you're interested in selections, get the information from robvinosports.com, homepage right there. Soft sell, guys. We're not looking to hammer anybody over the head. If you want the plays, by all means, we will have them ready for you. They're there every week. If you're not interested, we're not here to bang you over the head and hard sell you like some firms are. So it looks to be a pretty good weekend for us, Rob. I say the big plays will be on Saturday, and we look forward to it. I mean, the more we get into the season, the more we're learning about these squads, the easier it becomes to have successful days with college football, no doubt about it.
Absolutely. And not only is RobVinoSports.com a great place for you to get the selections of myself, Rob Vino, Derek Davis, it's just a great spot if you are a sports handicapper, if you are a number guy. Lots of power ratings and lines and historical data for you to peruse through at your leisure for both college and the NFL. Lots of great stuff. RobVinoSports.com. Rob, thanks for doing this again. Week 4 early look. We'll be back again next week to take a early look at Week 5 of the college football season and look back at everything we saw in Week 4 and everything we talked about today. For Rob Vino, I am Rob O'Connor. We will see you next week. Thanks for listening.